obviously we're talking to you because you're the non-resident ambassador to Sri Lanka from Israel. So this question has a bit of a comparison involved. At the UN Human Rights Council in March, Israel boycotted the proceedings, correct me if I'm wrong with my facts, because of the resolutions that were brought forth, one particularly with regard to these settlements. And obviously I don't have to tell you what happened with the Sri Lankan resolution, but a lot of the statements coming out from both the Israeli government as well as our government were similar, with the ideas that the council is hypocritical and that these resolutions in fact do more harm than good. So could I ask you, don't you see these two situations as very similar? In other words, what I'm asking you is this resolution on Sri Lanka, do you think it's detrimental, similar to the resolutions brought forth on Israel, and that it does more harm than good?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Let me try and answer it by maybe clarifying three elements. We have been facing for many years, Israel and Israelis, and Israeli society, one of the most difficult dilemmas a human being can face, which is how do you protect yourself and survive in a very tough neighborhood while not losing one of the most fundamental genes, an integral, indispensable part of our DNA, which is human rights. There is nothing more fundamental Jewish to our identity than this respect that we have for human rights, whether it is freedom of speech or freedom of faith, religion, gathering, things like this. This is a very, very difficult mission. And I have to tell you that, not as an ambassador, but as an Israeli and as a human being, I'm tremendously proud of what we've been doing. Our government, our armed forces are doing an unbelievable job in providing shelter, food, daily needs to human beings, to our Palestinian partners, whether it is in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, or in the West Bank. The second thing I would like to say is that one should be very careful in comparing all these cases, because each one of them has its unique features, I should say. People have to be very careful when they look at the other's case. Now, I don't think it's my place to make observations on policies of other governments.
But then,
there is. But at least in our case, it's quite obvious that we have reached the decision, unfortunately, that there are better ways to achieve and promote peace, stability, and even human rights than this specific platform.
So you do think that, in other words, you support the U.S. bringing around this resolution for other ways of addressing this reconciliation problem?
No. I'm speaking about the Israeli case.
Israeli, okay.
I'm speaking only about the Israeli case, and I'm once again reiterating. In our specific case, in the Israeli case, we have reached the conclusion that there are much better ways than to go to this place, if you want indeed to promote peace, stability, and human rights.
But you are the ambassador to Sri Lanka, so I guess it is your job to have an opinion on that front too. What would be your opinion about the resolution on Sri Lanka and the way that the reconciliation process is carrying on here?
Okay. Well, let me say the following. Friendship between Israel and Sri Lanka is long and long-lasting, and we have watched. I have to tell you in pain the horrible things that Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan people, Sri Lankan society have gone through in recent years. When we speak about, when we see the terrorism and the pain it inflicts on human beings, we understand exactly what it means.
When we come back, we continue the conversation with Ambassador Alon Ushpiz, the Israeli ambassador to India and Sri Lanka. The focus turns to U.S. politics, Israeli politics, and of course, Iran. You're watching a special edition of Global Perspectives on MTV Sports. We'll be right back after this commercial break. More than Beyond the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the stalled peace process, the other topic that is consuming international media attention is a looming crisis between Israel and Iran. Though he fell short of confirming any Israeli intention for a preemptive strike, Ambassador Ushpiz had some telling responses about Israel's stand on Iran.
In 2009, U.S.-Israeli relations took a turn when the Obama administration stood firm on the question of settlements and said a complete freeze on settlement construction is a precondition to any Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiation. However, months before the U.S. presidential election, the Obama administration is now trying to postpone or halt the UN probe into West Bank settlements.
I do want to switch a little bit now to U.S.-Israeli relations. Now, U.S., with regard to the settlements, again, U.S. is trying to postpone this probe that the UN is trying to do with regards to West Bank settlements. But some in your administration, as I read, have kind of boldly stated that they believe it's only until the presidential elections. Do you feel that the U.S. will stand by even after the presidential elections, assuming President Obama will be re-elected?
I've dedicated most of my career to the cultivation of relations between Israel and the United States. This is not only a profession, it's a hobby and a love, actually. I don't have the slightest doubt. You're speaking about a set of relations that is almost unprecedented in human history. These are two nations that are bound in mind and heart. There is such a fundamental, solid, ideological, emotional, shared genes between both nations and countries. And we have been through these changes of administration, by the way, in both countries, in Israel and in the United States, for so many years. And this bond has survived so many instances like this that I'm sleeping very tight at night, and I'm not. There is not even one wrinkle of concern on my forehead when it comes to the strength of Israeli-American relations.
As maybe a historical observer rather than a political analyst, looking back in history, what type of administration has been good for Israeli-U.S. relations? A Republican one or a Democrat one?
You don't have to put your money on one side or the other. You work with Americans. There is not red or white, red or blues there. We perceive America as America, with all its magnitude and richness, and we work with Americans, whether they are, administration officials, whether it is the president, whichever president it is. We had wonderful relations, and I can give you concrete examples with Republican presidents, with Democratic presidents. That's not the case. We work with Americans. There are no political divisions when it comes to us.
When it comes to Iran, Prime Minister Netanyahu has attracted a lot of criticism recently for the way he is handling the crisis with Iran by promoting the idea of military action against Iran. Even some prominent Israelis are saying it's not the best course of action.
One final question, Mr. Ambassador. Obviously, I would be very hated if I don't ask you this question.
That is something I would like to cause.
About Iran, having you in front of me, something that's on everyone's mind, obviously, around the world. I guess that I have two questions for you. The first one is a preemptive attack on Iran possible by the Israelis? Perhaps within this year, short term we're talking about.
Let me say the following. The constant attempt of Iran to acquire military nuclear capabilities is a catastrophe in waiting, not for Israel, or more precisely, not only for Israel. This is a tremendously bad development, first of all for the international community, and then for our region, what is called West Asia. This is not an Israeli problem. This, to begin with, is an international community problem, and it is reflected, this perspective of an international community problem or a regional problem is reflected in the fact that you have a whole list of Security Council resolutions speaking about this. And you have a list, if you look at the statements of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, you will find once again, I'm not sure that it's going to be shelves of books, but it's going to be shelves of statements by the GCC speaking in a very concerned tone about these aspirations of the Iranians. We don't have any fight with the Iranian people, but we certainly have our very grave concerns with the Iranian regime. This is a regime that is vigorously trying to acquire nuclear weapons. They do whatever they can and act against stability in West Asia. Incitement, calling publicly to the destruction of Israel and the Jewish people, which, by the way, is an interesting phenomenon because they deny that there was ever a Holocaust and nevertheless do whatever they can in order to create a second Holocaust. And they are the state-sponsored, number one state-sponsor of terrorism. We believe that the Iranian regime should understand quickly, promptly, in the clearest terms possible, that there is a very high price tag attached to their nuclear aspiration. And the vehicle to clarify this is through economic sanctions and political isolation. If indeed international community is interested in solving this through these means and not through any other option, which is on the table, because all options are on the table, and this is a statement not made by us, or not made only by us. These venues of economic sanctions and political isolation should be pursued vigorously, swiftly, as promptly as possible.
If, everyone thinks that an Israeli attack on Iran, if the program doesn't stop the nuclear program, is a real possibility. So if it gets to that point, would it happen without the backing of the U.S.? Or will you have to have the backing of the U.S. to go forward with such an option?
I don't think it's up to me, and I don't think it's my place to go into these very, very important questions. We Israelis have a responsibility for ourselves. It was always almost an enshrined principle that we take care of our security by ourselves. Whatever is decided, whenever it is decided, however it is decided, I'm not sure that this most respectable platform is the right place to discuss it.
Both Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Barack Obama will face re-election within just months of each other. It's still difficult to say definitively what kind of an impact either of the elections will have on the other, but the outcome will decide the future of relations between the two countries. As Ambassador Ushpiz indicated, the crisis in the Israeli-Palestinian region is so complex because it involves many other players from other parts of the world, and because of that, the outcome is also likely to have a much wider impact. That brings this special edition of Global Perspectives to an end. Before we go, we want to remind you again that the entire episode is available online at youtube.com/newsfirst Sri Lanka. We invite you to take a look and leave your feedback. Have a wonderful week ahead and join us again next Monday at the same time on MTV Sports. Thank you for joining us and good night.